Okay, guys, welcome back. I just want you to take a second and congratulate yourself for making this far. We are almost home, guys. We are almost home. Just a few more things we need to cover, and then you're going to be finished with this project. I promise you, by the time you're done with this, you're going to be so excited because you have learned so much. It's going to be great. And if you're just joining us for the first time, I will highly encourage you to click on the link below and watch all the previous videos that we have worked on so far. So that way you can get caught up with what we are going to be covering in this video. And just click on the link below to watch all the videos that we have created in the past, and also you'll be able to download the project files for this particular project. Just click the link below, you'll be able to download that. All right, so let's move on. So what I'm going to do is, currently within our main folder, we have one folder, htaccess file, and the index file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the Ajax file over here so we can walk through this all the way through. So when we are here, when we click on the button to say, hey, I want to create the short URL, it's going to go through the validation process, check to see if the long URL is empty or the reference name is empty, and whether or not the long URL has the right format, and also check to see if the short URL has a value or not. And once it's done, then it's going to wrap all those variable into a JSON object, and then within the JSON object it will have a few different variables. First one is called the data sent, and then it's going to have value of short URL, and then the reference name is going to have whatever the value the person puts it in, and then the long URL, and then this is just for the information, we really don't need it, but I included that in there. And then also the short URL code. And then this part, what this does is this is just a short format of sending the information over to the MK Ajax file. Rather than using a regular Ajax, we can just use a post. And this particular Ajax format, it takes a few parameters. The first parameter is the file that you want to access. Second parameter is the variables that you're going to send over. And then last but not least, this is just the callback function. Whatever information that we get back from the Ajax file is going to get passed through here, and then we can process it later. So let's hop on over to our MK Ajax file. So in here at the very top of the file, we are including the config file, the underscore config PHP. And like I said, if you haven't been following us through before, just click on the link before. You will know exactly what this config file includes and what it does and all that good stuff. So next line of code, what this does is it will check to see if data send variable it is set. If it's set, then the next check is, does it equal to short URL? So what that means is, going back to our index file, this variable, is that set? And if it's set, does the value in here equals this? That's all that says. If it does equal it, then it's going to go and process all the other stuff. So let's walk through this. So it's going to grab the reference name, then it's going to grab the long URL, and also it's going to grab the short URL as well. And then as far as the reference name, this particular function, which is the part of the DB class, what this does is it will take the information within the variable, whatever information that is in there, then it's gonna go through this process where it says, hey, run the variable value through this db clean function. And what the db clean function does is it check to see, does that variable value has any SQL injections data in there. If it does, throw them out. I love this function, and I think this function is very powerful. You should always, and I repeat, always run your data anytime you get any data from your user. You should always run it through here before going or passing it through your database or doing any further validation. And then same thing is happening in here, but if you remember, if you go back in here, the long URL, we are encoding that URL, so make sure none of the parameters or anything else gets missed. So when we go to our PHP side, we were gonna decode it to get the actual value of it. So that's what's happening in this line of code. And then short URL is just running it to the clean DB function to make sure it doesn't have any SQL injection values. And then the first check, what we are doing is check to see if the long URL already exists in the database. If it does, then it's gonna just grab the short URL parameter or the value of it and resend it. The reason why we're doing it, because for example, if you were to go into your short URL system on, let's say, Monday morning, right? And you say, I want to create a short URL for awesomefunctions.com on Monday. And then it will give you this short URL. And then that following Friday, you say, I want to do it again. Rather than it's giving you another short URL, it's going to see, hey, does this URL already exist? If it exists, I'm not going to create a new one. I'm just going to give you the value of the old one. So what that will do is it will cut down on the amount of entries you have in your database, which is a great thing to have. So that way your database file size will be shorter and condensed, and then you don't have extra stuff that you don't really need it. So that's the first check it does. And the second check, what it does is short URL. Is the short URL already in the system as well? If it is, then it says, hey, short URL, which is this line of code right here. It says, hey, this short URL already exists. So it's going to just throw you an error message. However, if these two checks already passed, and by the way, what this is going to do is, like this line of code, if it finds it, it's going to have a value of 1 because it found one row. And same thing for this one. So this is what we're doing. If the check URL has a value greater than 1, then throw an error message saying, hey, long URL already exists. And then it's going to pass all this stuff in here. And what I'll do is I'll just toss this out, because when I was testing this system out for you guys, I just say, hey, I'm just going to throw a generic message saying this already exists. But now, after revisiting that thing, I was like, I don't want to throw a generic message that already exists, because I want to return the value of the long URL that's already in the system that you're trying to create a short URL for, or again. So I'm going to delete this out. So what this does is status equals success, and the reference name is just whatever the reference name is in the table, and then long URL, whatever the long URL. We really don't need it, but I'm just passing it back just for the hell of it. And then followed by the new short URL. So this function, as I said previously, in the _config file, this particular variable, it just gives you the direct access to the URL that you're currently accessing it from. And then in here, it just adds to it whatever the short URL is. So moving on. So in this case, it didn't find anything, or the short URL already existed. However, if the short URL and the long URL did not exist, then it's going to go to the next part, which is right here, which means the value is going to be less than 1, which is going to be 0. So then what we want to do is we want to insert a new value, which will go into our short URL table. So let me bring that up. So let me maximize this a little bit more. So which will be right here. If I go to structure, so it's going to go to the database, short URL, and then it's going to add the reference name, long URL, short URL, which we already covered it in the database file video. So it's going to go in here and then add it and then it's gonna return the short URL code that we have gotten from the front end side. And then once it's done, it's gonna pass it back to the index PHP. So let's go back to index PHP. So this is what's happening. So when we get actually let me go back in here. So when we're done with this one, this is gonna throw it into a regular array, and then we send the information back. We wanna send it as a JSON array. So this line of code converts the regular PHP array into a JSON array right here. And then when we come back in here, it's gonna, being that we're using a post variable, it doesn't automatically convert it into a JSON array. So we use this function, convert it into a JSON array. And then what we want to do is we want to extract the status out. So if you go back here, and you will see in the success part, it has a success status and then other variables, whatever they're, and their value. So if you go back up, status, it has error. Status, success, because the long URL is already existing. So that's what those statuses mean. So what it does is check to see, hey, if there's a status that says error message, and check to see if what kind of error message it is. So if I go back in here and it says, like for example, if it has an error message status to be error and the error code is short URL in the system. And then it's gonna say short URL right here, and it's gonna display the error message. And the part that I deleted earlier is when I was saying that I wanted to give the user an error message that long URL already exists. Since I deleted that part there, I'm going to delete it from here as well, because now it's only going to have one error code. As you will see, if I go back in here, there's only one error, which is if the long URL already exists. I mean, if the short URL does not exist, if it already exists, let me rephrase that. If the short URL already is in the system, then it's going to say, hey, short URL already in the system. That's the message. So that person has to re-enter or create another one with the auto code. So this is the error message that's going to display in here. And this is part of the awesome function library where it uses the bootstrap and throws a error message underneath the field. And then if it's success, then it's going to hide all the screens, which will be the main screen and the post screen, which we have talked about it when we were looking at the template. And like I said before, if you're just joining us or this is the first time you are listening or watching this video, I will highly encourage you to click on the link below, so that way you can watch all the previous videos and able to download all the source code for this particular project. So moving on, so it's going to hide all the screens, and then it's going to add the value to new short URL, and then the field will be just whatever is coming back from the PHP, and then it's going to post it and hide and show the post URL, post div. And then I just have it in here, console log, just so I can see what's coming back in here. So let's test this out, see how everything comes along. All right, so I'm gonna bring back up the browser, and here I just went to awesome's function, but you can obviously take any long URL and get it. So I'll just go to the, I don't know, storage part of it, and then, I don't know, just click on cookies or something, and then I copy this URL, and then what I'll do is I'll refresh it. And for the reference, I'll just call it cookies or something like that. And then long URL is here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it have a short URL to be like auto code first. And then there it is. And let's check to see if it saved it in the database. So if I click on this to refresh it, so here it is in our short URL. So this is the long URL, this is a short URL, and this is the reference name, and this is the date and time that it was created. Okay. So if I want to go to it, I can just if I just click right here, it's going to select the whole thing, which we already talked about. So if I right click on it, just say go to it, it's going to convert it. Let's see why it didn't work. And the reason why it did not work was because we have to add in our index PHP part right here where it reads the information for the variable and then redirect it. So give me 1 second. All right, so now what I did was I just literally just paste the information so we can walk through it. So as we have looked at it in our htaccess video, where we say we're gonna set the variable code in the htaccess. So anytime somebody clicks on, goes to the short URL, it's gonna assign that code variable. And then in here now, we're gonna check to see if the code variable is set, and if it is set, it's just gonna grab a value. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna assign it to URL code, and then I'm just running it, even though I really don't need to. That's just me being a little precautionary, I guess, if that is a word. I'm just going to run it through my SQL injection prevention data function. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the short URL, and then I'm going to say, hey, check to see if the code that is in there, does it exist? And then in here, I'm going to say if it does not exist, then die and show a message, can't find your URL with a sad face. And then if it does find it, then I want to grab the long URL and assign it to a variable called URL, and then also assign and get the IP address for that particular user and assign it to IP. And this particular function actually is coming from the site function file that we have looked at in the previous video. And then I'm going to assign a date stamp to it, which is also the part of the site function. And then I'm going to assign it to the record date. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the tracker table. So in this case, let me show you. So in this case, it would be this table, and want to add the information here. So this is what's happening here. So tracker check, I'm going to check to see, first of all, if in the tracker table, does the short URL and user IP and record date exist? And let's go down here. If it does exist, see where it says greater than? If it does exist, then basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this function. It's the updater. I'm just going to increase the value to be whatever it is, then up it by 1. So this is part of the simple DB class. So what this does is this takes 3 parameters. First is the table name. Second is what I want to update. And the third is where equals blah. So you can have multiple different criteria but for this one, we're only saying where record ID equals record ID in here. So if I go back in here, when I was doing the testing part of it, and this is the record check tracker. So when this variable is set, it's going to have all of its row, because I'm selecting all the fields assigned to this particular variable. So later on here, I'm saying, hey, from the check tracker, grab the field ID and then equal it to be field ID. So basically what it's saying is the record ID, where record ID is whatever's in there, and then I want to update it. So in this case, this is the update field. So in here, the update, whatever that particular visitor count is, I want to increase it by 1, so which is right here. So it just says by 1. And then it's going to update it. And once it updates it, then it's going to redirect the person with this function, which is also part of the function library, the file that we have looked at in the previous videos. and then it's going to send the long URL to that particular. So it's going to redirect this to that long URL. However, if it did not find a record in there, so in other words, it could be another date, or the particular user did not exist, or if it didn't have an IP address for that one. So in other words, it could have a different IP address. So it's going to go in there and say, hey, insert a new record. So this part right here, where it says this function, it just inserts it. So this takes two parameters, which is the table name and what do you want to insert. So in this case, I want to insert the reference name, long URL, short URL, IP address, and visitor count in this case will be just one, which will be this part right here. And then the record date is whatever we attached earlier. All right, and once it has inserted it, then it's going to redirect it to the long URL. So if I go back here now, actually, let me close that so I can start fresh. So this is the short URL. So if I click on it now, actually, before I do that, let me just save it to make sure it's going to work. So in here, I'm going to select it, right click, go to. So if I do that now, and then voila, works like a charm. So let's check to see in our tracker table if it recorded anything or not. So if I click on tracker, and then there it is. So this is the ref name, long URL, short URL code, and the visitor is to be count B1. And the reason why it's showing this weird IP address because I'm just using a local host on my PC. However, if you have it on the server, then you're going to get your client IP address and it will work. All right, guys. So I think this will conclude it. We have successfully converted a long URL into short URL. And if we want to create another one, basically all we do is click on here and start the process again. So congratulations, you have finished it.